Taehyung's unexpected laugh when asked about marrying Jungkook sparks chaos among fans. Was it just a joke, or something deeper? Could Jungkook ever be your husband? The interviewer asked playfully. The studio lights bright and hot, the camera rolling live. Taehyung laughed. Not a nervous chuckle or a soft smile, but a loud, ringing laugh that echoed through the studio. In that moment, captured in 4K, clipped within seconds, spread like wildfire, time seemed to slow down for Jungkook. His eyes, wide and unreadable, didn't blink as the laughter reached his ears. Something in his chest shifted, tightened. That laugh didn't just brush past him. It carved into him like a blade dipped in irony. The air between them changed. The studio crowd laughed along innocently. The interviewer moved on. The crew kept filming. But the silence from Jungkook said everything that couldn't be broadcasted. Backstage, his jaw clenched. Taehyung, still trying to wipe the grin off his face, turned to Jungkook, nudging his arm. You know I was kidding, right? Jungkook didn't answer. Not immediately. His gaze was fixed on the floor. Not blinking, not moving. Then, without looking up, he whispered, Was it really that funny? That question, so simple, so quiet, held the weight of years, of promises exchanged in silence, of nights spent in long conversations without words, of glances that lingered longer than friendship could justify. Taehyung didn't know what to say. He had expected teasing, maybe a pout, a playful shove. But not this. A cold that seeped out of Jungkook like frost, pulling back from something unspoken between them. Outside the studio, the internet was in flames. Fans dissected the laugh, analyzing the tone, the timing, Jungkook's reaction, the silence that followed. Hashtags erupted. He laughed, trended worldwide, followed by Jungkook deserved better and not just a joke. But inside Jungkook, it wasn't about the fans. It was about the moment. Because that question, could Jungkook ever be his husband, wasn't just a joke to him. He had thought about it, more times than he could count. He thought about it on lonely nights after concerts, when the adrenaline faded and silence settled in. He thought about it when Taehyung looked at him like he was the only person in the room, even in front of thousands. He thought about it every time Taehyung held his gaze just a beat too long. He thought Taehyung did too, but maybe he was wrong. Or maybe Taehyung wasn't ready to face it. The days that followed were a blur of rehearsals, events, and half-spoken apologies. Taehyung tried to lighten the mood like always playful texts, inside jokes, gifts delivered to Jungkook's hotel room without a note. But Jungkook didn't laugh like he used to. He smiled, cordially, politely, with the same smile he gave to strangers. And that scared Taehyung more than silence ever could. At one particular dance rehearsal, their timing was off. They collided mid-step. Taehyung reached to steady him, and Jungkook instinctively backed away. The contact, so natural, once now felt intrusive. Taehyung froze. Kook, I didn't mean to... I know, Jungkook replied calmly. It's fine. But it wasn't fine. The boys noticed. Jimin, ever perceptive, pulled Jungkook aside one night. He didn't mean to hurt you, Jimin said gently. You know that, right? Jungkook's eyes met his, guarded. He just laughed, right? No big deal. But Jimin knew that tone. He'd heard it before. From fans. From people pretending they weren't breaking. Jungkook was retreating behind smiles again, the ones that didn't reach his eyes. Meanwhile, Taehyung sat in his hotel room, watching the interview clip on loop. The laughter didn't feel funny anymore. It sounded cruel, detached, like a shield, because that's what it was. He had panicked. The question hit too close, too raw, and instead of facing it, he had laughed. And in that laugh, he had lost something he didn't even realize he was holding so close. Their next public appearance was tense. Cameras caught the space between them wider than usual. The glances brief, rehearsed. Fans felt it, they always did. The magic, the invisible string between them, was fraying. But no one knew what was really breaking wasn't just the illusion. It was trust. It was the fragile hope Jungkook had carried silently. Taehyung tried once more. After a performance, when the others had left the green room, he approached Jungkook. Quiet. No cameras. No jokes. Can we talk? He asked. Jungkook didn't look up from his phone. About? You know what. Silence? Then Jungkook finally looked up. Why did you laugh? Taehyung swallowed hard. Because I got scared. Jungkook's expression didn't shift. Scared of what? Of how much I wanted to say yes. The words hung in the air like static. Jungkook blinked, his mask slipping for the first time in days. Then why didn't you? Because saying yes in front of the world means admitting everything I've tried to bury. Jungkook stood slowly. You didn't have to say yes. You just didn't have to laugh. He walked past him, brushing against his shoulder. This time, it was Taehyung who didn't laugh. But things don't stay broken forever. Time passed. They shared stages again. Shared songs? Shared memories? Not like before. Not yet. But one day, during an encore performance, Jungkook glanced over during the final note, and for a fraction of a second, their eyes met, and it was there again. That thing. That current. And this time, Taehyung didn't laugh. He smiled. Small? Real? Jungkook smiled back. Because sometimes, the deepest wounds aren't carved by malice, but by fear. And sometimes, healing begins with something as simple as a look that says, I see you. I'm sorry. I'm still here. The rain in Seoul had been falling for hours, soft and steady, like a lullaby meant to wash the city clean. The lights outside their shared van blurred into golden streaks on the window pane as Jungkook sat alone in the last row, head resting against the cool glass. Taehyung was in the seat ahead, earbuds in, staring blankly at his phone screen as if hoping it would distract him from the weight pressing down on both of them. It hadn't. Their schedule had ended hours ago, but neither had spoken since the concert. Since the smile. Since that single moment on stage when their eyes met and everything that had been broken between them flickered back to life. Brief, hesitant, but undeniably real. Jungkook closed his eyes. His fingers gripped the hem of his jacket, nails pressing into the soft fabric as if anchoring himself. The laughter still echoed in his head, and no matter how many interviews they had done after, no matter how often fans screamed their names or trended hashtags begging them to interact again, he couldn't forget that sound. Not because it hurt, but because it revealed a truth neither of them had spoken aloud. That they were both pretending. Pretending it didn't matter. Pretending the question wasn't real. Pretending the silence afterward didn't cut deeper than any argument ever could. Hyung? Jungkook said softly, voice almost lost to the rumble of the tires beneath them. Taehyung didn't move. Jungkook leaned forward. Taehyung. He pulled out one earbud, slowly. Yeah? The word was cautious, like it already knew it was walking into something heavy. Jungkook hesitated, then sat up straighter, arms resting on the seat in front of him. I want to stop pretending, he said. Taehyung turned slightly, brows furrowed, his expression guarded. Jungkook continued. I want to talk about what that laugh meant. What it didn't. What I thought it did. The van was still moving, but the world around them felt frozen. Taehyung exhaled through his nose. Not in annoyance, but as if trying to push away the wall he'd carefully constructed around himself. I didn't know what to say, he murmured, eyes not meeting Jungkook's. They caught me off guard. And it scared me because the idea of saying yes, it felt too real. Like once I said it, the world would know everything we've tried to keep between us. I never wanted the world to know, Jungkook said, voice low, steady. I just wanted to know that it meant something to you. That I wasn't the only one who thought about it. You weren't. Taehyung's voice cracked on the last word. His hands, long and graceful, fidgeted with a string on his hoodie. It was rare for him to lose his composure. On stage, he was untouchable. Magnetic. But here alone, in the back of a moving van with the one person who had seen every layer of him, he looked young again. Vulnerable. I used to imagine it, Taehyung admitted, still not looking up. What it would be like if things were different, if it wasn't complicated, if I could just be with you without worrying about everything else. Jungkook's breath hitched. He hadn't expected honesty, Not like this? Why didn't you ever tell me? He asked. Because if I did, I knew I wouldn't be able to stop myself. From what? From choosing you. Taehyung finally looked at him then. His eyes were glassy, rimmed with the weight of too many sleepless nights, and I was scared that once I chose you, I'd lose everything else. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of confessions left unsaid, of time lost, of longing buried beneath the polished surface of who they were supposed to be. I would have waited, Jungkook whispered. I still would. Taehyung's eyes shut, his throat bobbing as he tried to swallow the emotion that threatened to rise. I didn't think I deserved that. Jungkook reached forward, his hand brushing against Taehyung's arm. You do. Their fingers interlaced quietly. No one else in the van noticed. The manager was asleep. The driver focused on the road. And in that pocket of unnoticed stillness, two hands found each other again after months of being apart. Later that night, back at their shared apartment, the conversation continued. Not in words, but in silence that wasn't cold. In glances that lingered. In the way Taehyung handed Jungkook a cup of tea without asking. In the way Jungkook placed a blanket on Taehyung's shoulders when he saw him shiver, the distance was shrinking. Slowly, but intentionally. When the fans saw them together again at a fan meeting, sitting side by side, Taehyung's knee brushing Jungkook's the internet exploded. But this time, they didn't pull away. Jungkook even smiled when Taehyung leaned closer to whisper something, and Taehyung laughed, not the same laugh that had broken things, but a softer one. One filled with warmth. Still, questions came. One interviewer, bold and grinning, repeated the same infamous line that started it all. Taehyung, now that fans are watching your every move again, can we revisit that question? Could Jungkook be your husband? Taehyung turned to Jungkook. And this time, he didn't laugh. He looked at Jungkook, really looked at him, eyes full of apology, longing, and something dangerously close to love. And he said, I don't think the world is ready for my real answer. Jungkook smiled, slow and knowing. The fans lost their minds, theories spiraling, clips going viral within minutes. But behind the noise, the chaos, the shipped hashtags and trend wars, there was only one truth that mattered. Taehyung wasn't laughing anymore, and Jungkook wasn't waiting in silence. Later that night, they sat on the apartment rooftop. The city stretched below them, glittering and alive. Taehyung leaned back on his elbows, head tilted toward the sky. You know, he said softly, if we weren't who we are, I would have asked you already. Jungkook turned to him, brow raised. Asked me what? To stay. I'm already here. No, Taehyung said, turning his head to face him, eyes honest. I mean forever. Jungkook didn't answer with words. He leaned forward, gently pressing his forehead to Taehyung's, breathing him in. They stayed like that, the world blurring around them, time slowing, reality bending, until it was just the two of them, and the quiet understanding that maybe they couldn't say the truth out loud yet. But someday, they would. And when they did, there would be no laughter. Only the sound of two hearts finally beating in rhythm. Because love, real love, didn't always need grand declarations. Sometimes, it just needed time, and a promise neither of them would break again. Under the dim flicker of streetlights washing over the rooftop tiles, Jungkook's hands were warm against the cold metal railing, fingers curled tight like he was trying to hold on to the moment before it slipped into memory. The night air was thick with the scent of city rain, concrete still wet, the sky bruised deep purple. Beside him, Taehyung hadn't said another word since his confession. If we weren't who we are, I would have asked you already. Jungkook could still hear the echo of that sentence, even though it had been minutes, maybe longer. He didn't check the time. He didn't want to. Taehyung sat cross-legged now, a hoodie pulled over his head, hair damp from the lingering mist. He stared out at the flickering skyline of Seoul like he was watching some distant version of himself. The version that didn't laugh when the question came. The version that said something else. Jungkook finally moved, slow and cautious, like every step closer to Taehyung could break the fragile honesty between them. He sat beside him again, Not too close, not too far, just enough. I would have said yes, Jungkook murmured. Taehyung turned to him, his lips parting slightly like he hadn't expected a reply. I wouldn't even have waited for you to ask twice, Jungkook continued, his voice steady but soft, like a breeze that carried more weight than a storm. I know, Taehyung said, almost a whisper. That's why I got scared. Jungkook didn't look away. His stare was unwavering, eyes dark and deep, and filled with something Taehyung used to drown in back when they were younger, when things were easier, when they thought the future would just figure itself out. They'd never imagined that time would turn the simplest questions into weapons, or that laughter, so natural between them, could feel like betrayal. People don't understand, Taehyung went on, a hand running through his hair as he exhaled. They think we're always in control, that we're invincible, that just because we're idols, nothing hurts us the same way. But we bleed in silence too. We lose things too. I didn't want to lose you. You did, Jungkook said gently. Even if just for a little while. Taehyung winced like it physically stung. Do you still think about it? Jungkook asked, voice low, eyes cast downward now. About us, I mean, if things were different. Taehyung didn't answer immediately. He looked up at the moon, the way it was barely peeking through the cloud veil like it too was afraid to be seen. Every day, he finally replied, every morning when I wake up and check my phone, hoping there's a message from you. Every night when I see your name light up on stage monitors, but you're standing so far away. Every time someone brings your name up in an interview and I have to act like it doesn't mean anything. The words weren't rushed. They came like old songs Taehyung had memorized, but never dared sing again. Jungkook leaned back, breathing in slowly. He wanted to be angry, to accuse Taehyung of taking too long, of not choosing him sooner. But all he felt was something deeper than anger. Relief, not for the person Taehyung was, but for the time they'd lost. The versions of themselves they never got to be together. Then stop imagining, Jungkook said. Stop dreaming it, and start living it. Taehyung looked at him, startled. You mean that? I don't want to keep waiting for the right moment. It's never coming, Tae. There will always be fans, cameras, schedules, chaos. But I'd rather face that storm with you than stand in the calm pretending we're fine. The rooftop went quiet again. A stillness, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was sacred. I don't know how to do this, Taehyung admitted. Not publicly, not privately, not when everything we are is watched and picked apart. We don't have to do it perfectly, Jungkook replied. We just have to do it honestly. That night, there were no kisses. No confessions screamed into the sky. Just two people sitting in the dark, finally unafraid to be seen by each other. The next morning, the internet did what it always did. A blurry photo surfaced two figures sitting close together on a rooftop that looked eerily like the one attached to their building. The fan who posted it claimed she lived in the building across, that she just happened to look up. The fandom fractured into speculation and silence, defenders and doubters. Taehyung saw the photo trending before Jungkook did. His heart raced. For a second, he almost deleted every app on his phone, but he didn't. Instead, he liked the post. Simple, quiet. Jungkook saw it an hour later. He didn't like the post. He didn't retweet it. But he messaged Taehyung. You ready? Taehyung typed back. Not even close. Then a beat later. But I'm not running either. That afternoon, they arrived at the rehearsal studio together. No separate vans, no avoiding each other in the hallway. They even laughed once during warm-ups. The staff looked confused. Jin raised an eyebrow. Jimin kept watching them closely, his gaze bouncing like a pendulum between their smiles and the tension that still clung to their bodies like smoke. After rehearsal, Jungkook grabbed a towel, tossing one to Taehyung without a word. You two good? Jimin asked, pulling his hoodie up as he leaned against the wall. Taehyung nodded. Working on it. Fans are gonna go wild again, Jimin warned, not unkindly. We've been wild this whole time, Jungkook replied. They're just catching up, Jimin snorted. Well, I hope you're ready for part 2 of your interview clip going viral again. And it did. The media resurfaced the question again, replayed the original clip side by side with the rooftop image, with fans speculating every detail from hand placement to body language to the shared look at the fan meet that followed. But this time, when the interviewer asked again, this time more careful, more respectful, Taehyung didn't laugh. "I think," he said, meeting Jungkook's eyes directly on camera, "that some questions deserve better answers than jokes." There was silence. "Would you like to give one now?" the interviewer asked softly. Taehyung glanced at the crew, at the managers standing off screen, at the blinking red camera light. He smiled, and then looked at Jungkook again. "I think I already did." The moment was clipped, uploaded, dissected within seconds. But neither of them read the comments that night. They sat side by side in their dorm kitchen, eating ramen, the overhead light buzzing faintly. Jungkook nudged him. "You're gonna start rumors." Taehyung grinned, noodles hanging from his mouth. "About time, right?" Later, they stood on the balcony, side by side. Jungkook glanced at him. "So, if someone asked again, yeah? Could Jungkook ever be your husband?" Taehyung turned, no hesitation, no fear. "I'd say he already is, just not in the way the world thinks." And this time, when he laughed, Jungkook laughed too. Not because it was funny, but because it was finally safe to. Because they weren't pretending anymore. And because some questions don't need answers when the truth is already written in the way you look at someone, in the quiet spaces between their words, in the rhythm of their breath beside yours, in the way your name sounds in their voice after the world goes quiet. Jungkook never asked the question. Taehyung never needed him to. Because sometimes, love is loud. And sometimes it's a rooftop, a ramen bowl, a shared smile on a stage you thought had turned cold. But now it was warm again. And that warmth was all they needed. The days that followed were like walking along a thread thin, stretched between clarity and chaos, but no longer on the verge of breaking. Jungkook and Taehyung weren't hiding anymore, but they weren't exactly explaining either. It was an unspoken understanding, an unmarked line they now shared, where every glance said what words couldn't. And in the whirlwind of rehearsals, cameras, and interviews, they found brief moments to breathe together. On stage, they moved in sync again. That intuitive rhythm returning like muscle memory. Their eyes would meet across the choreography, and something in their bodies would relax. Like the world still made sense when they moved together. Even if only for a song. Fans noticed. Of course they did. The clips went viral, again. Every soft smile, every lingering glance was magnified into 1,000 interpretations. But what the fans didn't see were the nights when the stages went dark. The nights where Jungkook would wait in the studio, fingers tracing unfinished lyrics in his notebook, until Taehyung quietly joined him and placed a coffee on the piano. They didn't speak much then. Sometimes, the silence was enough. Other nights, Jungkook would play a melody low and haunting, and Taehyung would hum beside him, letting the emotion thread between them, wordless and raw. It wasn't always easy. There were still shadows. One evening, after a full day shoot, they found themselves in the same elevator. The air between them unusually tense. A question had been asked during the final interview, a cruel one disguised as humor about past flings, ideal types, the kind of people they would never consider dating. The room had laughed. Except Jungkook, because the interviewer, smirking, had ended the segment with a jab. So definitely not someone like a bandmate, right? And Taehyung, caught in the momentum, had grinned and nodded like everyone else. Now, in the silent space of the elevator, Jungkook kept his gaze fixed on the floor. His hands were shoved deep into his coat pockets, shoulders stiff. Taehyung shifted beside him, fidgeting with the sleeve of his shirt, stealing glances but saying nothing. When the doors slid open, Jungkook stepped out first. But Taehyung followed. "Wait," he said quietly, catching up. Jungkook didn't stop walking. "I'm tired. I know. I don't want to talk right now. But I do." Jungkook stopped. Turned. Taehyung's voice lowered, not wanting to cause a scene in the hallway. "You think I meant that?" Jungkook's jaw clenched. "I think you didn't even stop to think how it would sound." I panicked. Everyone was laughing, and it caught me off guard. "It's always a joke, isn't it?" Jungkook whispered, pain curling in his tone. Every time it gets too close to being real, you laugh. Taehyung stepped forward, voice trembling. Because laughing's the only way I know how to keep them from tearing it apart. Jungkook didn't move. And me? Taehyung exhaled shakily. I don't know how to protect you and be with you at the same time. Jungkook looked away, eyes glinting under the hallway lights. You don't need to protect me, Tae. I've never asked for that. I just wanted the truth. Taehyung's voice cracked. You are the truth. And that was when Jungkook's shoulders dropped, his anger folding into grief. He looked back at him not with fury, but with quiet resignation. Then stop hiding it behind what people want to hear. The next morning, the group had a full dance practice. Tension clung to Jungkook like sweat, and Taehyung kept his distance, not because he didn't care, but because he was trying to figure out how to approach again without wounding him further. During a break, Jimin pulled him aside. You keep doing this thing, Jimin said, arms crossed. You open the door just enough for him to walk in, then shut it the moment people are watching. Taehyung didn't deny it. Why? Jimin asked, not unkindly. Taehyung looked toward the corner of the room where Jungkook sat on the floor, earbuds in, staring at nothing. Because I'm scared that if I let the whole world in, Taehyung whispered, they'll break what little we have left. Jimin's gaze softened. You keep waiting for a perfect world, Tae. But love doesn't wait. It either grows through the cracks or dies in silence. Later that night, Taehyung showed up at Jungkook's door. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, hoodie over his head, hands stuffed in his pockets like a kid who'd been caught doing something wrong. Jungkook leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. What? I'm done laughing. Jungkook blinked.
I mean it, Taehyung continued. You asked me for the truth, so here it is. I think about you every night. I imagine a future where I don't have to wait for an off-camera moment to stand close to you. I imagine a world where my name and yours don't feel like a risk when said together. And I want that world, Jungkook, even if we have to build it ourselves. Jungkook stared at him, breath caught in his chest. I'm not asking you to forgive every time I made you feel small, Taehyung said. I'm asking you to believe me when I say that I'm not afraid anymore. Jungkook stepped back without a word. Open the door wider. Let him in. They didn't talk much after that. They didn't need to. Taehyung lay down beside him on the couch, their legs tangled under a blanket. Jungkook's head rested on Taehyung's shoulder, and for the first time in a long time, he let himself relax. No explanations. No camera lights. No crowd to please. Just them. Breathing. Healing. Choosing each other quietly. The next few weeks brought challenges, but something had shifted. At fan events, they stood closer, not performatively, not for show, but like gravity was simply pulling them into each other's orbit again. And at one major press conference, it happened. A reporter asked Jungkook, clearly fishing for a headline, if he still held a grudge about the infamous interview, about the laugh that started it all. Jungkook smiled. I used to, but then I realized something. The room went still. Taehyung looked at him, uncertain. Jungkook continued, it wasn't the laugh that hurt me. It was the fear behind it, but fear can't survive where there's love. Taehyung looked down, lips pressed together tightly. Jungkook reached across the table, bold, quiet, and placed his hand over Taehyung's. The reporters gasped, flashes fired. Jungkook didn't let go. Later that night, the two of them sat on their rooftop again, drinks in hand, wind tousling their hair. You sure you're okay with this? Taehyung asked, voice low. Jungkook leaned his head back, looking at the stars. Yeah, he said, because I'm not hiding anymore. And if people start questioning. They already do, Jungkook said, smirking. Let them. Taehyung smiled, eyes crinkling. You know, he said, nudging him with his elbow, if they ask me again, I might just say yes this time. Jungkook turned his head, amused. You think they'll ask again? Taehyung nodded. They always do. And what will you say when they ask if Jungkook could ever be your husband? Taehyung leaned in closer, eyes never leaving his. I'll say he already is, in every way that matters. Jungkook didn't respond. He just kissed him. Softly. Finally. And when the kiss broke, he whispered, "That's the first thing you've said that didn't need to be hidden." Taehyung chuckled, not the laugh that started it all, but one filled with peace. With truth. And the rooftop stayed quiet long into the night, two hearts finally beating as one, no longer silenced by fear or image, but made stronger by the truth they had the courage to hold in the open. Under the early morning haze that blanketed Seoul in a pale blue calm, Jungkook stirred awake, the weight of another day pressing gently against his chest, not heavy but familiar. Beside him, Taehyung's steady breathing was a rhythm that filled the quiet, one that Jungkook had grown used to again, like an old melody his soul never forgot. The light filtering through the blinds painted soft lines across Taehyung's bare arm draped over the side of the mattress, fingers twitching slightly as if even in sleep, he was reaching out. Jungkook didn't move. He watched him. The soft curls of his hair tucked messily over his brow, the faint crease between his brows even in sleep, the way his lips parted slightly, every breath a whisper of peace and exhaustion and all the pieces of him that he rarely showed the world. Here, he didn't have to pretend, and neither did Jungkook. It had been 2 months since that interview. Since the press conference. Since Jungkook reached across the table and held Taehyung's hand in front of a sea of cameras, daring the world to make something out of something that was already real. And the world did. The backlash was immediate. Some articles praised their courage, subtly hinting at something deeper without fully stating it. Others twisted the moment into a scandal, accusing them of queerbaiting, of marketing manipulation, of faking intimacy to stir fan loyalty. Then there were the fans, divided, volatile, protective, confused. Some cheered. Some cried. Some turned their backs completely. The label called them in for a meeting less than 24 hours later. They sat in a cold room, fluorescent lights humming above, a long glass table stretching between them and 3 high-level managers. Their CEO wasn't present, but his absence was louder than his presence would have been. The words weren't harsh. Not directly. But they were precise. Carefully chosen phrases like public perception, contractual obligations, brand risk, idle image. Jungkook didn't flinch. He sat straight, hands folded in his lap, eyes forward. Taehyung beside him remained still but visibly tense, his jaw set, foot bouncing under the table. When the monologue ended, Jungkook simply asked, "Are you telling us to lie?" The oldest manager, someone who had watched them grow since they were teenagers, shifted in his seat. "We're telling you to be careful, to be smart." Jungkook turned to Taehyung. Then back to the table. "I'd rather be honest and lose a few fans than live a lie and lose myself." The silence after that was telling. No one had a retort. They were allowed to leave without consequence. But the tension that followed wasn't subtle. They weren't paired together as often, fan events were adjusted, stage blocking changed, interviews were divided, schedules staggered. The label didn't forbid anything, they simply created distance. Taehyung noticed it first. "How long are we going to let them separate us in plain sight?" he asked one night, voice low as they sat on Jungkook's floor, eating takeout. Jungkook chewed quietly, then replied, "As long as it takes to make them realize we're not going anywhere." It was a silent rebellion. Subtle. Calculated. They didn't post photos together, but they wore matching shoes. Didn't tag each other, but shared identical captions. Didn't hold hands, but wore the same bracelet Jungkook made during a live stream, a braided band of red and black cord that Taehyung never took off. Fans began noticing again. The old ones returned. New ones whispered. The buzz came back, but so did the pressure. One night after another manipulated headline surfaced, claiming Taehyung was romantically linked to a female actress after a commercial shoot, Jungkook found himself packing his apartment, phone clenched in hand. The photo was clearly cropped, fabricated, but it didn't matter. Perception did. He called Taehyung. He didn't answer. He called again. Voicemail. Jungkook grabbed his keys and drove. The moment Taehyung opened the door, eyes puffy, mouth pressed in a thin line, Jungkook didn't speak. He just pulled him in, wrapped his arms around him tightly, and held him as if that could erase everything outside. They keep twisting it, Taehyung murmured against his chest. Jungkook nodded. Let them, we'll untangle it one thread at a time. Taehyung pulled back, eyes wet. I don't want to lose this. You won't, Jungkook said, not again. That night they sat side by side on the floor, the same position they always ended up in, talking about everything and nothing. Taehyung showed him a photo he never posted, one he took of Jungkook asleep during a flight, sunlight across his face. I kept it for myself, Taehyung admitted. It felt too personal, like something only I should see. Jungkook stared at the screen, then at him. I'm yours anyway, he said. It wasn't a confession. It was a fact. The next morning, Taehyung posted the photo. No caption. Just the image. Jungkook reposted it with a single emoji, a red heart. The internet burned. They didn't answer questions. Didn't clarify. Didn't deny. The mystery became their power. But it was more than just silence. It was resistance. A way to reclaim their narrative without giving everything away. Yet not everything was poetic. They fought. Not often, but when they did, it was like thunderstorms colliding. Once, after a particularly brutal day of back-to-back interviews, Jungkook snapped over something trivial, a joke Taehyung made during an interview that felt like another layer of avoidance. You keep acting like this is a game, Jungkook had said, packing their shared hotel room. It's not a game, Taehyung had replied, voice sharp. It's survival. Then maybe I'm tired of surviving. Taehyung flinched. The silence after that was deadly. Eventually, Jungkook apologized. So did Taehyung. But it left marks. Not wounds, but reminders. Love didn't protect them from pain. It just made the pain worth facing. And slowly, they built a rhythm again. A new one. Not perfect, but real. On their anniversary, the one no one else knew but them, they didn't do anything extravagant. They walked along the Han River, hoodies up, masks on, fingers brushing occasionally in the dark. They shared corn dogs, laughed over stupid memories, talked about the future. Would you still love me if I left all this behind? Taehyung asked suddenly. Jungkook paused. What do you mean? If I quit, if I walked away from the industry. Jungkook was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I'd follow you. Taehyung blinked. Maybe not right away, Jungkook continued. Maybe not publicly, but eventually, yes, because wherever you go, that's home to me. Taehyung reached for his hand. Held it. And this time didn't let go. Not when fans passed them and whispered. Not when someone lifted a phone and took a blurry photo. Not even when the wind threatened to expose them. He held his hand. And that image, though blurry and grainy, went viral the next day. Two silhouettes walking side by side. Hands clasped. Free. They didn't confirm it. Didn't deny it. But the world already knew. Because some stories don't need explanations. Some loves don't require permission. And some silences scream louder than any headline ever could. Their story wasn't finished. It was still being written. In glances and late-night drives. In lyrics only they understood. In rooftops and ramen bowls, and the echo of a laugh that once broke everything, but now meant something else entirely. Peace, truth, home. And Jungkook, watching Taehyung laugh now soft, real, unafraid, knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would never stop choosing him. Not even when the world asked the same question 1,000 times over. Because now, when they did, Taehyung didn't laugh to hide. He laughed to live. To love. And this time, Jungkook laughed with him. The morning after the blurry photo spread across every fan forum, Taehyung sat in the corner of the recording studio, knees pulled to his chest, head buried beneath the hood of his jacket. The walls around him were padded, quieting the world into a heavy hush. Across from him, Jungkook was adjusting the mic levels, pretending not to notice the way Taehyung's leg had been bouncing uncontrollably for the last 15 minutes. But he noticed, he always did. They hadn't spoken about the photo yet, hadn't spoken about the comments either. Some were filled with joy, others with betrayal, and far too many with veiled homophobia masked as concern. Jungkook had scrolled through a few before tossing his phone across the bed last night, the screen still lit with a trending hashtag that made his stomach twist. He didn't tell Taehyung. He didn't need to. The weight of those words was already pressing into both of them. A soft beat played on loop through the speakers, low and repetitive, like a heartbeat. Jungkook leaned against the console, crossed his arms, and finally looked up. "They think we did it for attention," he said, not raising his voice. "Like we planned it, like we're characters." Taehyung didn't respond at first. Then his voice cracked through the silence. "They'll always think something." Jungkook walked toward him, slow steps echoing against the wooden floor. He sat beside him, their shoulders brushing. "I hate that you're shrinking again." Taehyung looked up, eyes tired. "I'm not." "You are," Jungkook said gently. "You always do when the world gets too loud." Taehyung blinked slowly, then rested his head against Jungkook's shoulder. "How do you do it? Stay open, brave." "I'm not brave," Jungkook replied. "I'm just tired of being scared." Taehyung was quiet for a while, the beat still thudding in the background. "Do you regret it?" he asked softly. Jungkook's answer was immediate, no. And he didn't. Because in that fleeting moment under the city lights, hand in hand on the Han River path, with strangers passing by and phones raised and hearts hammering in their chests, he had felt more honest than he ever had in years. Not as an idol, not as a performer, but as a man who was done hiding the person he chose to love. That night they didn't go home. They stayed in the studio. Jungkook turned the beat louder, added strings, adjusted tempo. Taehyung eventually moved to the center of the booth, headphones on, voice smooth as he layered in a verse about silence, about watching stars fall and not knowing whether to make a wish or let them burn. The words were subtle, metaphors buried like secrets, but they both knew what the song was about. And maybe, just maybe, the fans would too. The next week was chaos. Paparazzi began following them more aggressively. Someone from the label leaked a rumor about the company disciplining both of them privately, and although it was denied officially, the damage had been done. Rumors spread like wildfire. Clips were taken out of context. Old interactions resurfaced, dissected under the microscope of obsession. But they didn't break. Taehyung started wearing the bracelet more visibly now, pushing up his sleeves on purpose. Jungkook stopped avoiding fan comments and began replying to subtle messages on Weverse, hinting, not confirming, never denying. It was a careful dance, a rebellion in slow motion, and through it all, they found new ways to protect what was theirs. They created a group chat with Jimin titled Safe House, where they shared thoughts they couldn't voice elsewhere. Jimin, ever their protector, didn't judge, didn't lecture. He simply held space for them. Sometimes the messages were short, sometimes long voice notes at 3 a.m. when sleep wouldn't come. One night, Taehyung recorded himself whispering, "Is it strange that I still get scared before I hold his hand in public?" And Jimin had replied, text blinking in the dim light, No, it means you still care. Their dynamic on stage changed too. It wasn't forced. It wasn't obvious. But the synergy was different now, calmer, deeper, like the notes they sang had roots. Jungkook's vocals grew more raw, Taehyung's expression softer. Fans noticed. How could they not? The performances felt like confessions. Then came the awards show. Their group won Artist of the Year. They stood on stage, a line of black suits and tears and shaky voices. Taehyung spoke first, thanking the fans, the team, the producers. But as he neared the end of his speech, his voice wavered. I also want to thank someone who reminds me every day that love should never be something we apologize for. The audience went still. Jungkook didn't react outwardly. He stood beside him, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the floor. But his chest was a war drum. And when it was his turn to speak, he looked up, straight into the camera lens and said, I think sometimes we spend so much time being what others need, we forget to be who we are. I'm trying to remember. The silence in the auditorium was thick. Then applause. Then screams. The moment went viral, of course, but this time the narrative shifted. Something about their quiet dignity began to resonate, even with those who had once criticized them. New fans came forward, many from communities that had long felt unseen, sending messages of thanks, of courage, of healing. The label didn't stop them anymore. Maybe they'd realized that some tides can't be fought, only ridden. A few months later, they performed their new song, the one from the studio night on a national broadcast. It was late, the last act of the show. They wore dark suits, eyes lined, expressions serious. The intro was stripped down, piano only. When Taehyung's voice broke into the first line, there was a hush across living rooms everywhere. By the time Jungkook joined in on the chorus, harmonizing like his voice was stitched to Taehyung's ribs, the meaning was clear. The camera zoomed out. They stood side by side. Not touching, but together. And that was enough. After the show, they walked home under the same city lights. No disguise. No mask. Jungkook's fingers brushed against Taehyung's. He looked up, sky deep and endless above them. Do you think it'll always be like this? He asked. A fight. Taehyung thought for a long time. Then replied, maybe, but not a losing one. Jungkook nodded, then smiled faintly. I'd fight for you. Taehyung stopped walking. Faced him. I know, he whispered. And then kissed him, not like a secret, not like an accident, but like the answer to every question they'd ever been too afraid to ask. The city didn't stop for them. It never had. But in that moment, beneath neon signs and passing headlights, nothing else existed but the space between two hearts finally, at peace with being seen. They were still learning, still stumbling, still hurting, but now they were doing it together. And that made all the difference. The soft hum of traffic echoed below their apartment window, muffled by the glass and distance, but still present, like a reminder that the world continued moving even while they stood still. Jungkook leaned against the kitchen counter, fingers curled around a chipped coffee mug, eyes unfocused as the steam curled into the air. The room was quiet, lit only by the faint orange glow from the hallway lamp. Taehyung's voice carried from the living room, low and thoughtful, murmuring into the phone as he spoke with his brother. Domestic, gentle, safe. It wasn't long ago that moments like this felt impossible, like stolen seconds borrowed from a life they weren't allowed to have. But now, the silence between them wasn't something they feared. It was something they lived in, grew inside, a silence filled with meaning, not the absence of it. When Taehyung hung up, he walked in, hair tousled, hoodie too large, his bare feet making no sound as he crossed the room. He didn't ask what Jungkook was thinking. He didn't have to. He wrapped his arms around Jungkook's waist from behind, chin resting lightly on his shoulder. We should go away, Taehyung said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. Jungkook turned his head slightly, enough to see the edge of a smile on Taehyung's lips. Where? Somewhere without headlines, or rehearsals, or expectations. Jungkook tilted his head back into the warmth of Taehyung's neck, exhaling slowly. That place doesn't exist. Taehyung smiled, pressing a kiss just below his ear. Then let's build it. They left 2 nights later. No announcement, no plan. Just a midnight flight, sunglasses and hats, hands brushing but never fully held until they were seated in a rented car on a coastal road miles away from Seoul. The sea greeted them with open arms, waves crashing in rhythmic applause as if welcoming them home. The sky was a palette of gray and soft blue, the kind that demanded slowness, the kind that held no rush. The small cottage they rented was old, with creaky floors and fogged windows, and the scent of pine baked into the wooden beams. Taehyung walked through it like a child discovering something sacred. He opened every drawer, turned every switch, tested the creaking of each floorboard. Jungkook followed him silently, eyes fond, letting the tension melt from his shoulders with every second that passed in the absence of obligation. They didn't talk about the industry, or the fans, or the next album. They talked about dreams they had as children, about the kind of silence that feels like safety, about what it meant to feel whole. They cooked breakfast slowly, burning the toast more often than not, eating while leaning against countertops with bare feet and sleepy smiles. Taehyung wrote lyrics on napkins, then lost them. Jungkook took blurry pictures on his phone that he refused to post. They slept tangled in each other like ivy, limbs overlapping, breath shared. And for the first time in years, they didn't feel watched. One morning, Taehyung woke before sunrise. He stepped outside, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders, breath visible in the cool air. Jungkook joined him minutes later, wordlessly handing over a mug of tea. They watched the sun rise over the ocean, the water catching fire in shades of orange and pink. "Do you think we'll always have to run?" Taehyung asked quietly. Jungkook took a sip from his mug. "I think as long as we have each other, it won't feel like running." Taehyung turned to look at him, the sky reflected in his eyes. "What if one day we stop being idols?" Jungkook shrugged. "Then we'll just be." "Be what?" "Who we are." The quiet between them then wasn't empty. It was everything. When they returned to the city, something had shifted, not in the way they walked or spoke or dressed, but in the way they existed, like they had stopped asking for permission, like they had chosen each other in a way that needed no validation. The industry didn't know what to do with that. Brands still wanted them but were now more cautious. Variety shows invited them separately. Paparazzi tried harder, but the two of them didn't budge. They stayed close, made decisions together, said no more often. They didn't flaunt what they had, but they didn't shrink from it either. One night, during a special documentary shoot about the group's 10-year journey, they were asked about regrets. Jungkook's answer was simple. "I regret the years I spent pretending I didn't love him." The room went still. The staff froze. But he didn't flinch. Taehyung reached out, placed a hand on his knee, eyes never leaving the floor. "I regret laughing when I should have looked him in the eye and said, 'Yes, he could be my husband. He already feels like it.'" The confession wasn't edited out. The producers fought to keep it. And when it aired, the world changed again. Some fans left. But new ones came, quieter, fiercely loyal. Some wrote letters, thanking them for showing that love didn't have to be loud to be real, that truth didn't have to be perfect to be beautiful. They kept going, year after year. Not every moment was poetic. Sometimes they fought about dishes, about missed calls, about public pressure and broken promises. But they always came back, always found each other again in the quiet, in the soft apology muttered into a hoodie sleeve, in the music they made side by side, In the way, Jungkook always waited for Taehyung to fall asleep first. And in the way, Taehyung always woke up earlier just to watch Jungkook dream. Time passed. The frenzy died down. The world shifted focus to newer idols, newer scandals. But they remained. Unshaken. Unchanged in the ways that mattered most. And on a cold day in December, surrounded by a few close friends and family members, in a private room lit with candlelight and the sound of laughter, Taehyung turned to Jungkook and whispered, "I want to stop calling you almost." Jungkook smiled, "Then don't." That night there was no announcement. No headline. No live-streamed event. Just two souls, quietly promising what they had already known for years. And for once, the world didn't need to know. Because they did. And that was enough. Winter settled over Seoul like a velvet curtain, muffling the city's usual chaos into something slower, more introspective. Snow fell in quiet spirals, collecting on rooftops, clinging to windows like unspoken wishes. Inside their shared apartment, the air was warm, thick with the smell of ginger tea, wood from the incense burner Taehyung insisted on lighting every morning, and the sound of Jungkook humming softly while folding laundry. They hadn't said much that morning. Not because something was wrong, but because silence had become a language of its own between them. One made of glances, gestures, the brush of fingers across fabric, the half-smile shared over steaming mugs. A kind of intimacy that no longer needed to be spoken to be understood. Taehyung sat by the window, sketchpad balanced on one knee, pencil dancing across the page. He wasn't drawing anything specific, just lines, curves, fragments of thoughts in graphite. Jungkook moved behind him, pausing to rest his chin on Taehyung's shoulder, arms wrapping loosely around his chest. The sketchbook fell forward, forgotten. "You're distracted," Jungkook murmured. Taehyung tilted his head slightly, brushing his cheek against Jungkook's. "Just thinking." "About?" Taehyung hesitated. "The past, the quiet before everything changed, and what's next." Jungkook pressed a gentle kiss to the curve of his shoulder. "You're allowed to think, just not spiral." "I'm not spiraling," Taehyung whispered. "Just wondering if we've already lived the best part of it, if everything from here on out will be quieter, simpler, maybe even a little forgotten." Jungkook gently turned him so they were facing each other. Being forgotten doesn't mean it wasn't real, and quiet doesn't mean it's over. "But don't you miss the chaos sometimes?" Taehyung asked, eyes searching. "The rush of fans, the adrenaline, the stages, the way the world used to hold its breath for us." Jungkook smiled. "I miss parts of it, but not more than I love this." This, Jungkook said, voice soft but certain. Mornings like this, a version of us that doesn't need to perform." They stayed like that for a while, forehead to forehead, the snowfall beyond the window a blur of white. Somewhere, the kettle began to sing, but neither of them moved. Not until the water boiled over and the room was filled with the sharp hiss of urgency. The quiet was over for now. Later that day, they bundled themselves into scarves and coats, stepped out into the cold, and walked through the streets of a city that once screamed their names. Now, it merely whispered. Occasionally, someone would recognize them, an older fan, eyes wide with memory, or a younger one who wasn't sure if they were seeing a ghost or a legend. They didn't mind. They smiled. They bowed. They kept walking. Hand in hand, finally. No one chased them anymore. No one screamed. It wasn't sad. It was peaceful. They wandered through Gyeongbokgung Palace, snowflakes clinging to their lashes, footsteps muffled against the powdered ground. They stood before the frozen lotus pond, and Taehyung leaned his head against Jungkook's shoulder. "Remember when we came here during our trainee days?" he asked. Jungkook nodded. "You said you wanted to be remembered like the Hanok roofs, still, strong, but part of something ancient. And you said you wanted to be like the wind, always changing." Taehyung smiled against his coat. We became both. Jungkook chuckled. A roof and a gust of wind makes no architectural sense. But it makes emotional sense, Taehyung replied, and that's enough. They went home with frozen noses and numb fingers, but warm hearts. They made ramyun and curled up on the couch, a blanket over their legs, a movie playing softly that neither of them fully watched. As night deepened, Jungkook reached for his phone. He opened his voice memo app, hit record and started humming. It was a melody that had lived inside him for months, unfinished. But tonight, with Taehyung's heartbeat against his thigh and the snow tapping gently on the windows, it found its way out. Taehyung listened quietly, then added his own voice, a lower harmony, smooth and slow. They didn't write it down, didn't plan to release it. It wasn't for charts or streams or fans. It was just for them. Their song. Unreleased. Unfiltered. Uncomplicated. The next day, they were invited to a friend's wedding. An old manager, someone who had watched them grow from wide-eyed teenagers into men who now stood side by side, not out of habit, but of choice. The event was small, intimate, the kind where the laughter was loud and the lighting was soft. At the reception, someone passed them the mic, teasing, asking for a song. Jungkook looked at Taehyung. No choreography, he warned. Taehyung smirked. No cameras either. And so they sang. Not a BTS song. Not even a known one. They sang the melody from the night before, raw and unfinished, their voices weaving through the silence like silk, holding the room in suspended awe. When the last note faded, the applause was quiet. Not because it wasn't moving, but because no one wanted to break the spell. On the way home, Taehyung was unusually quiet. You okay? Jungkook asked. Taehyung looked out the window, city lights flickering across his face. I keep thinking, he said slowly, about how strange it is that we used to think love had to be hidden, that honesty was a risk, when really silence was the bigger danger. Jungkook nodded. We were scared, the world taught us to be. Taehyung reached for his hand in the dark, but we unlearned it together. And Jungkook squeezed his hand gently, thumb tracing the lines of his palm. That's all that matters. Years passed. Albums came and went. Friends married. New idols rose. But their bond never faded. In a world obsessed with the next big thing, they became a quiet legacy, not just because of their music, but because of the way they loved, steadily, openly, gently. And one summer morning, beneath the magnolia tree in their backyard, Jungkook knelt. Not for drama, not for photos, just for truth. Taehyung's eyes filled with tears before Jungkook even spoke. I don't need a crowd, Jungkook said. I don't need a stage, I just need you to say yes. Taehyung nodded, voice broken and laughing. You don't even have to ask. They didn't call it a wedding. There were no tuxedos. Just linen shirts and bare feet, and a small circle of people who had walked with them through storms. They read vows they wrote the night before, scribbled between laughter and wine and late-night ramen. They kissed under string lights, danced barefoot in the grass. No cameras. No press. No proof except for the memory of it. But that was enough. Because their entire story, every stolen glance, every painful silence, every laugh that once hurt and then healed, had led here. To this moment. To this peace. To this love. And they were finally living it out loud. The sun dipped lower behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the grass as twilight settled around their home. The soft hum of cicadas filled the air, mingling with the scent of earth and evening dew. The guests had left hours ago, laughter and embraces trailing behind them like petals, but neither Jungkook nor Taehyung moved from the wooden bench beneath the magnolia tree. They sat there in silence, fingers loosely entwined, their foreheads touching, hearts aligned in a quiet kind of forever. A breeze drifted through the garden, rustling the leaves, and Jungkook let out a long, slow breath that he hadn't realized he'd been holding for years. It wasn't just the pressure of fame, or the weight of years spent filtering every word, every glance, every touch. It was the release of having finally allowed himself to believe that happiness didn't have to be postponed. That joy didn't need to be earned. That love, real, flawed, persistent love, was something he could live out in the open. Taehyung's eyes were closed, his body relaxed against Jungkook's side. A thin ring of gold circled his finger now. No inscription, no embellishment, just a symbol, a promise. Not made for cameras or crowds, but for the boy he met in a rehearsal room years ago. The one who grew beside him, challenged him, broke him, healed him. Jungkook whispered, "I don't feel like I've lost anything." Taehyung smiled without opening his eyes. "Because we didn't, we chose." They stayed there until the stars appeared. And when they finally rose, hands still laced, they walked barefoot across the damp grass back to the warmth of their home. That night in the gentle quiet of their bedroom, Jungkook held Taehyung as he slept, his cheek resting against the slope of his shoulder, breathing slow and even. Moonlight spilled through the window, painting their bodies in silver and shadow. And for the first time in his life, Jungkook wasn't afraid of tomorrow. Not because he knew what it held, but because he knew who he'd face it with. The next day, they returned to the world. Schedules resumed, music meetings, branding deals, letters from fans, questions from executives, but they no longer entered those rooms with their shoulders hunched and hearts tucked away. They didn't explain, they didn't defend, they simply existed together as they were without apology. When asked about their personal lives in interviews, Jungkook smiled softly and said, "I'm at peace." Taehyung, when pushed by a particularly bold host, answered with a shrug and a grin. The heart knows. It was enough. Because people were beginning to understand that there were some stories that didn't need confirmation, only presence, that two people choosing each other day after day was louder than any headline. Still, not everyone celebrated them. Old criticism resurfaced now and then. A bitter tweet, a dismissive article, a thread dissecting their every movement. But where those once had the power to unravel them, now they merely glanced and moved on. Their love no longer hung in the balance of public opinion. It lived fully within the walls of their home, in the songs they wrote when no one was listening, in the meals they cooked for each other with sleepy smiles and soft music playing in the background. They continued to work, of course. Music was still a pulse in their veins, a thread that tethered them not only to their past, but to each other. Their next project together wasn't announced as a unit, no formal subunit, no flashy rollout. Just a surprise release. A joint album,